Welcome to Crimeroom, a true crime podcast. I'm the speaker, and my name is X. It doesn't matter who I am, it only matters what they did. This week, we decided to release a bonus Halloween special, a Minisode. So join us. Enter the room.
Crimeroom is designed for mature audiences and is unsuitable for young or sensitive listeners. Discretion is strongly advised.
Teresa Etherton was a 17-year-old student of Battle Creek Central High School in Battle Creek, Michigan, USA. One day, Teresa got an invitation from her neighbour, John White. John was 22 and recently married. He had just set up a new slot car racetrack in his basement and wanted Teresa to see it. She honoured his invitation. After all, it was just a friendly visit. Another reason Teresa was comfortable with going over to John was that he was a polite and quiet young man, and someone she knew from the area. Furthermore, he was married with kids, so what could go wrong? Teresa had just walked into the house when she felt a very sharp pain behind her, just below her shoulder blade. Suddenly, she couldn't breathe. Her lung was punctured. It didn't take long for her to realise that she had been stabbed. She turned around to look at the person behind her and recognised pure pleasure in John's eyes. He stabbed her again and again and again. She began to struggle. She fought her assailant with all her might, but just when she perceived victory, Teresa was disarmed. Her attacker had cut open her gut. As if that hadn't shocked her enough, the 22-year-old husband looked into her eyes and told her, "This isn't my first time. Just shut up. You're making it more difficult than it has to be." It occurred to Teresa that John had likely been carrying out this gruesome act for some time on others, and he had been getting away with it. If she had any hope of survival, this information just squashed it. Another thing Teresa realised from the attack was that John kept calling her by his wife's name, and he seemed terribly upset that his wife had gained weight. Teresa was weak now. She could not fight him anymore, and suddenly, she realised that playing dead might be her one way out. He held her and kept rocking her as he stabbed her, whispering cruel, soothing things like, "Shh, go to sleep." In all, the high school girl was stabbed 15 times. As she lay there, blood oozing out of her profusely, her host, now assailant, stood over her and uttered another set of shocking words. He said, "Well, are you dead yet? You're going to be a really nice piece of meat." Teresa asked him what he was talking about, and he boldly replied, "If I can't have you, I'm sure as hell not going to let anybody else have you." John White then bent over, wiped her mouth clean, held her hand gently and kissed her. He kissed the helpless, bleeding, dying teenager. Then he stated, "I'm really sorry you had to go like this, but what the fuck, you're just a woman." During this time, Teresa noticed John had accidentally cut her chin and not her throat. The blood masked this discrepancy, and Teresa played dead. The shock had been constant, but what happened next took away all hope Teresa ever had of leaving that place alive. Her assailant's wife walked in and put a sheet over Teresa. Teresa begged the woman for help, and these were the words she received from John's wife. "Shut up. Just shut up." She and her husband were in on it together. Just when Teresa had accepted her fate, her assailant received a visitor. She gathered all the strength she could muster and screamed her lungs out for help. The visitor immediately alerted the police, who arrived with paramedics. Teresa got medical assistance, and her would-be host, John D. White, was arrested for the assault. In 1981, the court found him guilty of assault with intent to murder. He apologised to the court and sought for help instead of prison time. He said, "I wouldn't listen to people that tried to tell me that I did have a problem, and I realise that now. To which Judge Paul Nikolic, the then Calhoun County Circuit Judge, replied, "It is by the sheer grace of God or whatever that the victim in this case is still alive." The judge sentenced John D. White to 5 to 10 years in prison and recommended mental health counselling throughout. White appealed the court's decision. His trial lawyer had failed to raise the plea of insanity, and he claimed he was suffering from partial amnesia at the time. John succeeded in his appeal and got 2 years probation, no more jail time, provided he received mental health treatment. Teresa was going about her business, very oblivious to the amendments made after her attacker's sentencing. It was not until 2 years later, at the office of the Secretary of State, that this tiny detail was released to her. While standing in line at the office, she heard White's voice. She turned around, and there he was, smiling back at her. Teresa screamed in shock, grabbed a pole holding up the security rope, and ran towards him with all her might, while yelling to the security guard what John had done to her. The security guard stood in her way and held her back from John. "Run, baby girl, just run," were the only words that the security guard said to her. Teresa ran away as fast as she could. Life was good for John D. White, as his loving wife and 3 kids were still his for the keeping. In 1994, Vicky Sue Wall was a 24-year-old young woman who was having an affair with a married man in Oshtemo Township. The man had just quit his job with a company where he worked as a long-haul truck driver and started working at Textile Systems Inc. in the township. One July morning in 1994, at around 3 a.m, Vicky was caught on surveillance camera hopping into a black pickup van at the Mayor parking lot on Gull Road. After this photographic event, Vicky was never seen alive again. Investigations began into the young woman's disappearance, and leading it was the Deputy Sheriff of the Kalamazoo County, Eric Dunathan. Dunathan invited Vicky's boyfriend over for some questioning. In the course of the interview, the sheriff found the man to be evasive. For one, he first told Dunathan that he did not know what the sheriff was talking about, and that he had not seen Vicky. When the sheriff proceeded to confront him about the content of the surveillance video, he said that he did meet up with Nikki there, but she was alive when he left her. The sheriff was convinced that the boyfriend has something to hide. A few days later, Vicky's boyfriend attempted to commit suicide by mixing some pills and alcohol. He failed. Just a couple of days later, the detectives received information from him. He claimed that he may have hurt Vicky during one of his blackouts. He revealed that he usually had blackout spells, and he was of the opinion that he did violent things whenever the spells came. He admitted that it might have been possible that he had hurt Vicky during one of his blackouts. The detectives got a warrant to search his apartment and it was clean. Further investigation with luminol, used to reveal the presence of blood, revealed several glowing spots, indications that there was definitely blood present, and lots of it. Upon a DNA test, it was discovered that the blood was indeed Vicky's. 6 weeks later, and there was no information on the whereabouts or status of Vicky Sue Wall. Shortly after, a Kalamazoo County resident was walking down the road on land beside his parents' home, about 2 miles from the Mayor parking lot, when something caught his attention. He sighted a white tennis canvas shoe and a pair of underwear discarded. Curious, he went further and was welcomed by a strong odour. He saw a skull. Adrenaline took over as the young man turned around and immediately sprinted in the opposite direction. The police were contacted immediately and they arrived on the scene to recover the body. The deceased was a woman who was naked except for a shirt and her bra wrapped around her neck. Her remains were so badly decomposed that the autopsy could not tell the cause of death. According to the pathologist, the manner of death was suggestive of homicide. Shortly after the investigation, John D. White was charged. He was charged with murder, but in 1995 he pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter. At sentencing, John apologised to Vicky's family for the tragic incident and added that he loved Vicky very much. At sentencing, John F. Foley, the then Kalamazoo County Circuit Judge, said, "It appears from your previous violent acts against women and this unexplained violent action that you have a dangerous level of self-control," and went ahead to sentence John to the maximum 8 to 15 years in prison. In 1996, John and his wife got divorced. In 2007, John finished serving his sentence and came back to town living periodically with Gabriel, his youngest son. Sally Gay was a member of a small Mount Pleasant church, the Christ Community Fellowship Church in Deerfield Township. The church had just 14 members and a brand new pastor. He was an ex-convict and, having spent some time in jail, had seen the light and turned to Christ. Sally was a devout member of the congregation, and it did not take long until the pastor fell in love with her and proposed to marry her. She agreed to marry John D. White. Sally had a beautiful 24-year-old daughter, Rebecca Gay. Rebecca had a 3-year-old son of her own, Conway. Rebecca's boyfriend, Aaron Quinn, had plans to give Rebecca a diamond ring on October 31st, 2012, Halloween. Rebecca lived just down the street from her mother's fiancé, so every once in a while her son would go over to the pastor, who would look after him while his mother was busy. Sally was in love, or so it seemed. She trusted her fiancé with all her heart. After all, he recently had given his life to Christ. On the other hand, Rebecca had no idea what her mother's fiancé had been in jail for, or whether he was a first-time offender. However, she did know that he made her mother happy, and that was all that mattered. Gabriel White, John's son, believed that all was not well with his father, but sincerely hoped he had changed. There were signs that suggested a repetition of similar acts from the past, but being a son and wanting the best for his father, he let it go. It was 2012, on Halloween, when John White felt the urge to have sex. That was normal, except after this urge came with the fantasy. He needed to have sex with a dead body, and he knew whose body he wanted. The urge and fantasy had lasted for over 2 weeks. On October 31st, 2012, John D. White had downed around 5 bottles of beer. Confident, he proceeded to his potential victim's home. She was not alone, but her companion was fast asleep and unsuspecting. He picked up a mallet and struck his victim on her head several times. He needed to make sure she was dead. He picked up a zip tie and strangled a helpless woman. Then he had sex with the corpse. When he was done, he put the body in his pickup truck, together with the murder weapons, a mallet, zip tie and bloody towels. He drove for about half a mile and dumped the naked corpse in the woods. He proceeded to Rebecca Gay's home, where he picked up her little boy and dressed him up in his Halloween costume. He drove the boy to an area Mare store, where his father, a Midland resident, picked him up. On November 1st, 2012, Rebecca Gay was declared missing. She had disappeared from her house and no one had seen her. There was no evidence of a struggle in her house, so a violent kidnap was not considered by police. Meanwhile, Pastor John D. White urged his congregation to pray for the missing Rebecca Gay for her safety and discovery. The next day, police arrested John D. White again. According to the Isabella County Sheriff, John White kept saying that he's a bad person, he's a pastor, and he felt bad for the people in his church. He was never remorseful about what he did to his victim or anything else. He just said that he was attracted to her and thought she was an attractive woman. John was a cooperative suspect. He willfully led the police to his victim, Rebecca Gay's body. During his confession, he admitted to murdering her and undressing her, but could not remember if he fulfilled his sexual urge. On March 28, 2013, the 55-year-old John D. White pled guilty to second-degree murder and to being a third offence habitual offender. There were about 30 people in the courtroom that day. Most of them wore t-shirts with inscriptions like, "We love you, Becca Boo," and "Never Forgotten." During sentencing, Paul Chamberlain, the then Isabella County Chief Circuit Judge, said that he saw no reason why John D. White should ever leave prison. He gave John the longest sentence he had ever received, 56 to 85 years in prison. The judge also said that a plea agreement stipulated a sentence of 22 years, 6 months minimum to 56 years, 3 months maximum. Deborah Gay, the victim's sister, said that her family would want a registry created for violent offenders and murderers like John D. White, because if such a thing had existed, her sister would probably have known John's past and would still be alive. On August 29, 2013, at the Michigan Reformatory in Iona, John D. White was found unconscious in his prison cell. He was rushed to the medical station, but at 4:38 a.m., the 56-year-old prison inmate was pronounced dead. Details about his suicide method were not released to the public. Thank you for listening to this Halloween minisode. I'm the speaker, and my name is X.
If you enjoy listening to Crime Room, please give the show a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Crime Room is available now on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe for notifications when new episodes are released. Sign up to the Crime Room newsletter or submit show suggestions at crimeroompodcast.com. That's crimeroompodcast.com. Crime Room is narrated by X. Additional voicing by Matthew O'Reilly Kavanagh. This episode was written by Sandra Chikura. Produced by Rachel McDermott. Scored and mixed by Andrew Lynn. The Crime Room theme song is by Sarah Sherlock.